Story title, The Last Train to Ember Street. At 11:47 every night, when most of the city had already decided what it wanted to forget, a train with no number arrived beneath the oldest station in the world. Not the station people knew above ground, not the one with advertisements, coffee machines, tired workers, and late announcements, but the station buried far below it, under locked iron gates, under walls blackened by a century of smoke, under tunnels removed from every map as if someone had once tried very hard to erase the idea that they had ever existed. No ticket booth sold passage there, no schedule mentioned it, and no sane person was meant to find Platform Zero. Yet on the night this story began, a 19-year-old courier named Neo found it by accident, with blood on his sleeve, a stolen silver case in his hand, and half the city chasing him like he had just robbed the heart from a king. Neo was not a hero, not at the beginning, not in the noble, polished sense. He was fast, clever, underfed, and far too familiar with the geometry of rooftops. He knew how to disappear between alley shadows, how to climb broken drainpipes, how to smile at danger just long enough to make it underestimate him. He had grown up in the southern districts where promises went to rot, where the rain tasted of iron, where children learned early that being good and surviving were often two different professions. His mother had died when he was 12, his father had vanished into prison or war or myth depending on which drunk in the neighborhood was telling the story, and since then Neo had belonged only to speed, instinct, and the private oath he had made over his mother's grave, never be helpless again. That oath had made him useful to the wrong people. By 19, he ran messages, contraband, names, and secrets across the city for gangs too rich to touch their own dirt. He did not ask what was in the packages. That was the first rule. He did not ask who would bleed because of them. That was the second. The third was simpler: if a client ever started looking afraid of what they had hired you to carry, you were already dead and simply waiting for the city to become polite enough to mention it. On that night, all three rules broke at once. The silver case had seemed ordinary at first, too light for money, too small for weapons, too elegant for drugs. The man who gave it to him had worn gloves in warm weather and spoke with the slow care of someone standing very close to panic. "Deliver this to Black Orchard Tower before midnight," he had said, "no stops, no detours, and whatever you hear from inside it, do not open it." That should have been enough warning to send Neo running the other way. Instead he took double pay and a head start. That was his mistake. It was raining by the time he crossed the bridge district. The city below was all reflected lanterns and slick stone, all light breaking itself on wet streets. Neo moved across rooftops with the case strapped under his coat, boots barely touching tile before the next leap. He might even have made it cleanly if the case had stayed quiet. But halfway across the old clock quarter, it made a sound. Not a mechanical click, not metal shifting, but a voice. A girl's voice, faint, frightened, and impossibly clear. "Please," it whispered, "do not take me there." Neo stopped so abruptly he nearly slipped from the roof. Rain ran down his neck. The whole city seemed to hold its breath. He looked around, saw no one, then looked down at the case beneath his coat and felt something cold move through his ribs. A second whisper came, weaker this time. "They killed everyone else. Do not let them finish." Neo stared. For perhaps 3 seconds he considered doing the smart thing, completing the job, getting paid, forgetting the voice. Then the church bell to the east rang once, and with it the skyline erupted. Searchlights snapped on across neighboring rooftops. Black-clad enforcers surged from hidden ladders and windows as if the buildings themselves had started spitting out hunters. Somewhere behind him a woman shouted, he heard it, "Take him alive." Neo did not waste time understanding. He ran. What followed was less a chase than a war fought at sprinting speed. He vaulted chimneys, skidded across slates, crashed through a laundry line, swung under a broken fire escape, and hit the next roof hard enough to jar his teeth. Bolts of blue electric fire ripped through the rain behind him, blasting stone apart where his head had been half a second earlier. The men chasing him were not common gang soldiers. Their coats carried the crest of the Ash Bureau, the city's unofficial official monsters, the ones hired when the law wanted something done while still pretending innocence. They climbed too fast, aimed too well, and smiled too little. Neo cut left across the clock quarter and dove through the shattered window of an abandoned music house. Glass bit his cheek. He rolled, came up running across rotting floorboards, and burst out the far side onto a suspended tram cable over a 6-story drop. He could hear boots thundering behind him. He could hear the silver case whispering beneath his coat, not words now, just breath, as if whoever or whatever was inside it were trying very hard not to disappear. Neo leapt from the cable to a passing freight tram, barely caught the edge, hauled himself up, and landed beside crates of machine parts while the city streaked by beneath him in rain and light. 2 bureau agents landed on the tram roof behind him a second later. One fired. The shot tore through a steel crate inches from Neo's arm. He grabbed a loose chain, whipped it backward, caught the nearer agent across the face, and kicked the second one off the tram into a flood of darkness below. The first agent lunged with a blade that crackled blue at the edge. Neo ducked, slammed the case into the man's throat, and for a split second the silver metal flashed with a strange inner light. The agent froze as if struck by lightning from inside his bones, eyes wide with pure animal terror, then stumbled backward and dropped from the moving tram without a sound. Neo stared at the case in disbelief. It had defended itself. Or defended him. Neither possibility felt safe. The freight tram screamed around a corner toward Central Station, and ahead Neo saw more bureau lights already converging. He had been boxed in. Roofs, streets, bridges, every visible route was tightening shut. The city had decided he mattered too much to lose. The case spoke again, louder this time, with effort, as though the voice had fought through deep water to reach him. Down, it said. Platform 0. Neo shouted back without thinking, where? Beneath the station. 3 locked gates. Run before they wake him. That was not nearly enough information, but it was all he had. He leapt from the moving tram before it fully stopped, crashed shoulder first onto the slick platform of Central Station, and kept moving through crowds that had no idea a private apocalypse was sprinting through them. People screamed as bureau agents burst from stairwells. Neo vaulted ticket barriers, slid under a closing maintenance door, and shot down a service staircase smelling of rust and hot wires. Behind him came the pounding of boots and the hard metallic commands of hunters who knew they were seconds from success. The first locked gate was old iron with a chain thick as his wrist. Neo tore a tool roll from his belt, jammed picks into the lock, and worked by instinct while footsteps hammered closer. His fingers had always been fast. Tonight they felt supernatural. The lock clicked open. He slipped through and slammed it behind him. The second gate was worse, newer, bureau-sealed, electric. Blue arcs danced along the bars. The silver case pulsed under his arm. Without knowing why, Neo pressed it against the control box. The whole system died in a burst of black sparks. Gate 2 opened. Alarms began shrieking. Great, he muttered, because subtlety was clearly doing fantastic tonight. The third gate stood at the bottom of a tunnel where no air should have moved, yet wind blew from beneath it carrying ash, smoke, and something stranger, the smell of summer fires in places he had never seen. This gate had no visible lock, only a brass plate engraved with one sentence, only the unchosen may pass. Neo almost laughed from stress. Behind him the bureau had cut through the first 2 gates. He could hear them coming. The silver case whispered, "Tell it your true name." Neo pressed his bleeding hand to the brass and said the name his mother had used only when she wanted him to remember he had once been loved before he became useful, Nyren Vale. The brass plate shuddered. The gate slid open. Beyond it lay a staircase descending into red darkness and, impossibly, the distant sound of a train arriving in no place where tracks should exist. Neo ran down. Platform 0 was vast enough to hold weather. It stretched beneath the city like the buried hall of some forgotten empire, all red lamps, black stone, iron arches, and a ceiling lost in smoke. No advertisements. No people. Only one long platform, and beside it, waiting in total silence, stood a train made of midnight metal and emberlit windows. It looked old enough to remember the first war and alive enough to begin the next. Symbols burned faintly along its sides. Steam curled from beneath it like breath from a sleeping dragon. At its front, where an engine number should have been, there was only an emblem, an eye crossed by a blade. Neo slowed despite himself. The case beneath his coat had gone very still. Then a door on the nearest carriage slid open, and a conductor stepped out. He was tall, narrow, dressed in black uniform cloth threaded with copper, with silver gloves and a face too calm to be entirely human. One of his eyes was amber. The other looked mechanical, all polished rings and turning glass. He studied Neo, the case, the blood, the chaos echoing from the tunnel above, and said in a voice like a match striking, "You are not on the manifest." Neo bent over, hands on knees, gasping, and answered with the only honesty panic had left him, "Yeah, well, my evening's gone weird." Behind him the bureau reached the stairwell and opened fire without warning. Blue bolts streaked across platform 0. The conductor did not flinch. He lifted one gloved hand. The air in front of the train folded. The bolts hit the invisible wall and turned into a flock of burning black feathers that scattered across the platform. Neo stared. The conductor sighed very softly, as though rude guests had arrived again. Bureau agents poured down the stairs, 10 at least, then 15, armed with shock rifles and hooked blades. At their center came a woman in a long white coat stained by rain, her dark hair pinned high, her expression sharp enough to cut open lies. Director Sarah Vey, Ash Bureau. Neo had heard of her. Most criminals did, usually right before deciding not to survive an encounter. She stepped onto the platform and looked not at him first, but at the conductor. "Old treaties still bind," she said. "Surrender the vessel." The conductor's mechanical eye turned once with a faint glass click. "This platform is neutral ground." Sarah's mouth almost smiled. The treaties ended when the girl in the case was stolen from the bureau. She pointed one gloved finger at Neo. "Hand her over, courier, and I might kill you last." Neo slowly straightened, rainwater and blood dripping from his jaw. Every instinct in him screamed to throw the case and save himself. But then the voice inside it whispered, "Very small now, please." And something old and dangerous woke in his chest. Maybe it was conscience. Maybe it was the memory of his mother dying because powerful people had decided one poor life cost less than a cure. Maybe it was simply that he had been used all his life and could not bear the idea of becoming the hand that delivered someone else into oblivion. He tightened his grip on the case and said, respectfully, "No." Sarah's expression emptied of every remaining mercy. "Kill him," she said. The platform exploded. The first wave of bureau agents charged. Neo moved before the thought finished forming. He ducked behind a pillar as blue fire shredded stone. The conductor vanished from where he stood and reappeared among the attackers in a storm of copper light and black coat tails. He did not fight like a man. He fought like a precise disaster. One silver-gloved hand broke a rifle. One turn of his body sent two agents crashing through the red lamps. His cane, which Neo had mistaken for decoration, unfolded into a black blade of impossible length. Sparks and feathers and blood went everywhere. Still more bureau agents kept coming. Sarah herself drew twin pistols etched with ember symbols and fired at the train. Every shot seemed aimed not to damage metal but to wake something sleeping inside it. The carriage windows began to glow brighter, angrily. The case in Neo's hands pulsed harder and harder until the latches burst open by themselves. A wave of silver light hit his face. Inside the case was not a machine, not a jewel, not a weapon in any ordinary sense, but a girl, or rather the shape of a girl compressed into light and glass. She looked perhaps 16, with white hair floating as if underwater, eyes full of burning symbols, and cracks of gold flickering under her skin like caged lightning. She was folded impossibly small inside the silver interior, knees to chest, one wrist bound by black wire covered in bureau seals. When she saw air and motion and battle around them, she gasped as though surfacing from drowning. Neo, who had seen many impossible things in the last 10 minutes, could think only, well, that is definitely new. The girl looked up at him. Her voice, outside the case now, was stronger. "My name is Eri," she said. "If they take me back, the city burns." Neo almost asked for clarification, but a bureau blade came at his head and clarification became a luxury item. He shoved Eri and the open case behind a pillar, caught the attacker's wrist, twisted until bone cracked, stole the man's weapon, and drove him into an iron column. Eri touched the black wire on her wrist, grimaced, and said, "I can stop them if you break the seal." Neo slashed at it. Sparks erupted. The wire snapped. The entire underground station inhaled. Then Eri stood up fully, and the temperature changed. Red lamps blew out. The tracks below the train began glowing white. Her hair rose around her face in a halo of static light, and when she lifted one hand, symbols like burning constellations spread across the ceiling. Sarah Vey saw this and for the first time looked afraid. "Shoot her now," she shouted. Too late. Eri opened her hand and the air tore. A shockwave of silver fire blasted outward, lifting bureau agents off their feet and hurling them down the platform like broken dolls. Stone cracked. Iron screamed. Neo hit the ground hard, shielding his face. Through ringing ears he heard the conductor call out, "Get her aboard, now, before she tears the station open." Neo crawled to Eri. She was shaking violently, light leaking from her eyes. "I cannot control it," she whispered. He grabbed her hand. "Then we leave." Simple words. Hard job. Sarah, half buried in rubble, rose again with murder in her face. From inside her coat she drew a final weapon, a long iron spike covered in sealing script. Neo saw immediately what it was for. Not killing. Capturing. Worse. Sarah lunged straight for Eri. Neo moved on reflex. He stepped between them and took the spike through his side. Pain arrived as pure white animal noise. He dropped to one knee, staring stupidly at the iron protruding from beneath his ribs. Sarah tried to wrench it free and drive it into Eri next. Neo grabbed her wrist with both hands, blood slicking his fingers, and smiled the ugly, exhausted smile of a cornered thing that had nothing left to lose. "No," he said again, and this time it came out like a vow. Eri saw the blood, saw the spike, saw the choice he had made for her without even knowing what she truly was, and something in her face broke open. The power around her changed, not wild now, but focused. She touched Sarah's forehead with 2 fingers. One silver mark flashed. Sarah flew backward across the entire platform and hit the far wall so hard the stone split around her. Silence followed, brief and stunned. Then Eri collapsed. Neo caught her before she hit the floor, then nearly collapsed himself because being impaled, it turned out, did absolutely nothing for balance. The conductor was suddenly beside them, cleaner than seemed possible after such violence. He looked at the spike in Neo's side, then at Neo's face, then said, "If you die on my platform I will be annoyed." Comforting, Neo managed. Together, half dragging, half carrying Eri, they made for the train as more alarms howled from deeper tunnels. The city above had realized something beneath it was going catastrophically wrong. Carriage doors opened one after another down the train like awakening eyes. Inside, Neo glimpsed impossible passengers, a woman in armor made of stained glass, a child holding a thunderstorm in a jar, an old man with wolves sleeping in his shadow. None of them looked surprised to see blood on the floor. As soon as Neo and Eri crossed the threshold, the train shuddered alive. The conductor slammed the door, touched 2 fingers to the black wall, and shouted a command in a language that sounded like fire learning grammar. Platform 0 detonated behind them as Sarah's remaining agents opened one final barrage. Too late. The train moved without acceleration, without the mercy of ordinary speed. One moment it stood at the platform. The next it was tearing through darkness so fast the windows filled not with tunnel walls but with streaks of entire landscapes, deserts under blue moons, oceans floating upside down, forests of glass antlers, burning cities, snowfields lit from beneath. Neo slid to the carriage floor, one hand clamped over the spike in his side, the other still holding Aries' wrist as if letting go might end the world. She stared at him with eyes full of exhausted light. "You saved me," she said. Neo laughed weakly through pain. "Yeah, apparently I make terrible professional decisions." The conductor knelt opposite them and examined the wound with clinical displeasure. "Ash bureau iron. Nasty. If removed badly, your heart stops." "Great," said Neo, "because things have been a bit too relaxing tonight." Aerie pushed herself up despite trembling. "I can help him." The conductor raised a brow. "Can you do so without exploding the carriage?" Aerie considered this with alarming sincerity. "Probably." The conductor sighed the sigh of a man whose career had become ridiculous decades ago. "Proceed carefully." Aerie placed her glowing hand above the wound. Silver symbols spread over Neo's skin. He screamed once, loud enough to startle the wolves in the old man's shadow 2 carriages down, then the pain dropped away like a cut rope. When he looked again, the iron spike lay black and harmless on the floor, and the wound had sealed into a thin glowing scar like a line of frozen starlight. Neo touched it in disbelief. "Right," he said faintly, "that's new too." The train roared on through impossible dark. For the first time since the chase began, there was room enough to ask the real question. "What are you?" Aerie looked out the window where a sky full of red comets was flowing backward. "I am an Ember Key," she said. "One of the last. I open sealed cities, sleeping engines, old weapons, dead suns, things that were locked for a reason. The Bureau found me first. They wanted to use me to wake the furnace under Ember Street." Neo frowned through exhaustion. "I know Ember Street. It's just a dead district." Aerie met his gaze. "It is what they built over the furnace because they were afraid of what still slept beneath it. If the Bureau wakes it, the city above becomes fire." Neo sat back against the carriage wall. "Of course. Because apparently tonight required an actual buried apocalypse, not just a small one." The conductor rose. "Then our destination is obvious." He straightened his cuffs as if preparing for dinner rather than war. "Next stop, Ember Street." Neo stared. "Hold on. We are going back." The conductor's amber eye glinted. "Did you imagine this was the end of the story?" Outside the window the impossible worlds began slowing, narrowing, until once again there were tunnels, stone, sparks, the buried arteries of the same city that had tried to kill them. The last train was turning back. Neo looked at Aerie, at the glowing scar on his side, at the dark reflection of his own tired face in the glass, and understood with a kind of terrified clarity that his life had just stepped over a line from which it could never return. He was no longer a courier. He was no longer running one job badly. He was now sitting on a myth with a living key and a conductor who folded bullets into birds, heading straight toward a buried furnace beneath the city, while the Ash Bureau recovered behind them and prepared to finish what it had started. And despite the fear, despite the blood, despite the absolute insanity of everything, Neo felt something move inside his chest that he had not felt in years. Not safety. Not certainty. Purpose. The train screamed into the dark toward Ember Street. Aries' light reflected in the windows like the first sign of dawn. Somewhere ahead, beneath the sleeping district, something ancient was waking. Neo leaned back, closed his hand around the seat edge, and smiled the dangerous smile of a boy who had finally found a reason bigger than survival. "All right," he whispered to the night beyond the glass. "Let's see how bad this gets."